Hello, everyone. I'm going to do this video is a Worlds review of my Worlds run. I forget exactly where I ended up placing. I think I ended up around 50th with a record of an official record of 8-4, which is a little bit distorted by 2-for-1s. But I figured it'd be useful to go over the replays and make sense in a lot of theme on my channel. If you have replays that you want to go over or want me to look at or talk with me, I've done some on stream where I've looked over replays with Ed and some other people about their Worlds games or whatever. I think that's a lot of fun. So I brought this Sportsmetal list that went 5-2 on the day. And basically my thinking was, yes, global food, like Vacheron being banned means I needed to figure out what agenda I wanted. I either could go with Global Food Initiative or Ikawa Project. And I figured Global Food Initiative was better because with the Ikawa Project, you sometimes lose on 3 steals and you just can't defend against 3 steals. You're going to give up 3 steals in most games. And so even though I have to cut and go down to 2 audacities, I can put in other tools, notably more Bass Churnbogs and an extra Jeeves, and try and make up for the difference that way. The other thing I had going for me was I figured basically no one would be on Clot, and also everyone would take out a lot of the sports kind of tech. So the Docklands passes that criminals were running would be gone. People would be down to a single turning wheel. I knew Big Max would basically have 1 turning wheel, 1 to 2 Stargates in like a 40-something card deck. I knew that the Snare Bears were going to be on Ma, and Ma could be a challenge, but I also figured almost no one else was going to be on Ma, so if I could dodge my 10 teammates, I would be in a good spot. And that is more or less how it worked out. We'll see exactly as it goes through the games, but this deck ended up being incredibly consistent and reliable, much more powerful than I thought. And that's sort of what I was finding in testing, is that we all said, oh, this deck isn't good. One of us should make it and try it just to make sure. And I did, and was quite surprised at how it did. And this was the Steve list I ran. It went 2-3 on the day. One of my 2-for-1s we played out, and I won that. Steve did win that, so it technically finishes like a 3-3 on the day, though that last game was a little bit sloppy. And I think that's pretty disappointing. I felt like this was a runner meta. It turned out to not be a runner meta because of how diverse the corp field was. But I think I could have played Big Max. It would have been a better suit for my play style. I just had never played it before decklist submission was going in. I had just been playing Hive Mind Max and Steve. Because I figured Steve was going to be the best deck like several weeks before, so I said I'll start grinding Steve, and I just turned out to not really be the case. Additionally, this Mutual Favor is supposed to be a Mad Dash. I just had been practicing with the Mutual Favor and not the Mad Dash for a while, and then forgot to switch it back in time for decklist submission, which is a real bummer. It ended up being almost irrelevant, and I actually used the Mutual Favor in one game in a way that ended up being relevant, but it still probably would be better as a Mad Dash for most games. So this video is pretty long. Definitely tune in, tune out, and I definitely sort of towards the end skim through replays a lot. But if you have replays you want to submit from your worlds or decks you thought are worth talking about, I have a lot of fun going through those. I had Ed on stream for a long time on shortly after Worlds, the Tuesday after Worlds, and we went over some of his replays and talked about decks, his and a couple other people's. And if you ever want to come on and talk with me about replays and stuff, happy to do that. And most weeks I'm streaming starting around 7 p.m. Eastern time. If you want to come by and drop off replays, I'm always happy to have you on so that it's not just me trying to fill air. So all right, so I'm actually just going to do a chronological run through. So starting my very first game, I got paired against Gilesdavis, which I was a little bit annoyed about because I felt like Giles is better than the average entrant for this tournament. This Corp game kind of plays out like almost all of my Corp games did, or at least 5 of my 7 Corp games basically all play out more or less the same. Or my opponent just doesn't really have the tools to make me sweat at any point in time, and they don't get enough valuable single accesses that I really have to sweat it out. So the big thing in the Sportsmetal list was just about trying to present a lot of threats. So I would do a lot of extra drawing, and then doing stuff like, oh, okay, I can install Mega Pre, install Hyperloop. If they steal both, it's not really that bad for me. It's 2 points, and I get a bunch of cards and clicks. Or if they don't, I just get to score them out. So I'll just use Lateral to make some money while I do so. So I actually think like later in the tournament, you'll see me just like do double installs of stuff like this. And it's hard. So like the thing I have to worry about when playing against Cabanessa Wu is that they probably or certainly have the potential to have Clot in their list. And here, like one of the things that I went back and forth with on the day is how much I need to rush versus how much I can build up my board. And so here, I guess I just felt like I could build up my board. Installing the Mega Pre behind an ice, because Giles is only on 4 credits, this saves me a fast advance tool most of the time. Or if they commit a lot of resources to it, like they did, I just basically get my 2 credits back, and they're out a bunch of tools. They're now on 1 credit, so I'm really out and away. I'm actually not sure why I don't use the Bass there instead of the Biotic Labor, because the Bass is a thing that can actually die. I think that's, a mistake. I'm using Sprint. And then, yeah, the reason I'm on 9 ice in the sports list is basically so that I can somewhat reliably protect Rashida in the early game. And getting those early Rashidas is a big deal. What am I doing? Okay. I think I'm just trying to pull the biggest bait of all time, which is questionable when I have stuff in hand. What do I do? Okay, I just take credits here. Yeah, I actually think I'm playing this a little slowly. I have the Bass in hand. Leaving the Spin Doctor here, because Giles going down to 4 credits is a big difference for me. It means that they can pull out the Clot, but not use it necessarily. Let's see, I gain 3. I'm going to red level to, I think... So I probably actually should have red level to install the second Spin Doctor, but it is what it is. Oh. Okay. Interesting choice from me. And then I guess Giles isn't threatening the combo, isn't threatening Clot anymore, so I can actually just do the Baller, fast advance to the GFI. So I actually think I didn't play terribly accurately this game, but my opponent's deck just didn't have a lot of the tools. I asked afterwards, and there just in fact was no Clot. So it's very hard for me to lose this matchup in a lot of scenarios. We're gonna actually go the next replay though. I think I made a lot of mistakes, which I think are somewhat interesting, and they sort of come down to there's like 2 to 3 choices I make, and I was talking about this with Ed on my stream on Tuesday, which won't be up for that much longer, but will be up for a tiny bit. So this game, I made several assumptions about what the board state was that turned out to not be correct. And this is a board state where I think I should have won most of the time. It turns out my opponent kept a hand I shouldn't have kept, and that also influences this game, but I can't control for opponent's mistakes. I should just react to them correctly. This hand I didn't want to keep because while it has 2 drip cards, that's basically all it has, and I'm not going to be able to contest early, and I sort of figured AgInfusion would be putting on early pressure. This hand is probably worse because it now doesn't have drip cards, and the diversions are very difficult to land. But generally I feel okay about how most of this game plays out, so I'm just building up. I actually think going for the server 1 with a click left is a real threat here, and with only 5 credits, there's only end the run stuff can be rezzed here, and that would be pretty good for me. So getting the Rashid is nice, and it's just, yeah, when they don't draw first turn econ, you don't have to respect the Anansi, and you should play around that. And a lot of my game is about playing around the Anansi. why do I do what I do here? Because I think I could have installed the Anacam and then used the deuces this turn. That might have been better. So there's like small efficiency things here. So I expose Mausolus and HQ, and then I just say, oh, let's just go in anyway. Because it's not actually going to kill me. None of the cards in my hand are that important. And I can recur Dirty Laundry and Deuces. So those are effectively the same card most of the time. Let me see a Purge. And so the CVS being there suggests to me that there's probably a Cyberdeck Sandbox suite in the list. And also now that the HQ Ice is res, that's the other that's the other reason you try and make a run on an exposed HQ Ice is not there. I can now actually land diversions, which makes a big difference in this game. And so that you read as an NGO. I expose Macrophage, and I'm saying, sure, I'll run into Macrophage, or just eat up the NGO front so I know where the money is, because then I can just, at some point, once I draw the right stuff, I can just diversion on HQ again. I maybe even could diversion here, but I think getting down the drip cards makes some sense. I think I end up installing... So there's probably this is one of those turns where I should be a little more aggressive. But like this Citadel install, I think is just a meme. I was like, oh, I can run through the Mausolus, float the tag, and clear it. But there's just no real need for that. This unresed ice on HQ means I can't diversion again anymore. So I'm back to drawing for breakers. Opponent's only on 8 credits, so it is going to be hard for them to pose a real scoring threat. But I do think something like running R&D here, instead of installing the Citadel, is like a much better play, and it's just some free pressure that I would get. And again, at 6 credits, I don't think this is a real threat to score. I think this is an NGO front. And I see a data loop on server 1, and I want to get them to res it. They'll res the data loop. I put some cards back. And then I use deuces to draw the cards again. So it sort of balances out. And now I've drawn the turning wheel, so my plan at some point is to get the turning wheel down and start applying pressure to centrals. And I want a healthy amount of credits so that I can actually do stuff. I don't think I ever actually exposed this ice. I just sort of assumed it was a Nazi the whole game and that Begalter could carry me through. And it seems like it did. Getting the falsifieds right is nice. But potentially I should have saved the falsified for this turn so I could verify that's the agenda rather than the last NGO front, but I can be fairly confident that's an agenda. But I don't have a breaker out, which is unfortunate. And so instead I go to pressure HQ. Maybe I should have diversioned here, because if I had gone Amina, clicks 2-3 diversion, no, I can't actually contest server 1 there still, so it's not a big deal. And hey, I get 2 rips, and like this is probably these sorts of runs that are especially those runs on R&D, probably should have been making in a couple of cases instead of clicking for credits when the runners or when the corp is low on credits. Now, I also probably thought that was instead of going all in to contest that, I thought that was probably a sandbox, and I was like, oh, 4 credits isn't that big of a deal. Being 7 is unfortunate for me. Let's see. This mutual favor, as I sort of mentioned in the intro, is supposed to be a mad dash, and that would be relevant in this matchup. The data loop bounce isn't that bad for me because I actually was holding a class act specifically so I could reinstall and draw 4 for a click so that Oboe wouldn't be that safe. And I think this is one of those turns where I actually make some big mistakes. So I think this bravado is fine. Um, but I think not installing the political operative here is a bit of a mistake because, like, I don't know what this is, but it does turn out to be an analytic void, and I can't. So basically, I'm now forced to run it again. If I instead installed the analytic void, I just go to 6 points here, and I'm in a pretty happy spot. But now I'm in real threat if an oboe ever gets on the table. Now the other option I have here is I just spend 4 turns drawing because, or the reason I spend the whole turn drawing here is that if even though I can trash the void, I just lose to there being an oboe in HQ where they just go install advance, and I have no way of scoring it. So this is where this turn, being a little, not installing the polyp ends up being a huge mistake. Mutual favor, because if I no, I can install the polyp and then eat their ice as well, I guess is the, so I'm a little stuck either way. So I'm sort of click compressed throughout, and I think running through this data loop so many times for sort of not a lot of benefit ends up being a big cost for me here. This drawing up, like, it's fine. There's not going to be a scoring threat immediately. Opponent's on 6 credits, so it's really, I should be applying pressure to centrals as much as possible. I hope I run R&D here. Okay, not sure why that was taking so long to resolve. Maybe there was some typing going on. So yeah, I just see a Kakugo. Inside job is quite nice. But again, I should install the, oh, and I do finally install the political operative. And here I think is actually my key mistake in this game, is I trash this Rashida instead of the Anoetic Void. Giles going to 8 credits probably doesn't make as much of a difference as Giles having the ability to make me run through server 1 multiple times. Because the data loop is a big deal. Now, the other option I have here is saying, well, maybe I should run Central some more. Even a Nancy gets rezzed, that's okay. And that's, so I do run R&D, which I think is fine. I then inside job this server, get a void trigger. And here I think I make what was actually the mistake here, which is I go and bravado server 1. There's not a good reason to, and it means that I have to discard cards to data loop, which then makes me less able to contest oboes in like 2 to 3 turns. And also, I don't actually have enough credits to do anything but trash the void. If I could trash both the regolith and the void, I think this play is maybe okay. But I can't, and so I spend 3 credit. I spend basically 4 credits, make 4 credits back, and so the bravado was like, this was a -2 cards to do something I could have done if I had saved the polyp instead. And this is also, for some reason, I forget that this is the Kakugo, and so I'm going to make a misplay around that later. Here I also decide, you know what, I have 4 cards in hand, and my assumption is that Giles doesn't have an oboe in HQ, but I don't think that assumption was very well founded. I had seen 2 cards in HQ, but there had been a lot of drawing in between those. I had not locked R&D. I had soft locked it. I had seen a good chunk of cards, but I think actually in this hand, I've only seen, like, I'm scrolling over it now, but the only card I'd seen in this hand is the Ike. There is an oboe in hand, and there's an Anansi in hand as well. And you can't see it, but there are also. So I say, oh, I have a chance to win the game. And I actually went and did the math on this at some point, and my odds of winning were not that low on that individual access. Let me pull them right. but they're only not low if you assume that there are no oboes in hand. With the actual distribution of agendas and the fact that I don't have a mad dash, my chances of winning off that turning wheel dig were pretty slim. And so I probably could have instead swept all of HQ to make sure there was no threats in HQ. And that would be another option here. Another thing I could think about is bouncing on my turning wheel digs here. Though I guess Steve has some remedial value. I also see 2 seamless launches off the top of the deck, which is very, very scary for my current board state. And that the run on HQ ends up meaning that I have to click for credits here because I can't bravado R&D, which is pretty rough. And then on this final turn, I take the worst possible line. I see that this is an oboe, which I think is worth seeing because it does change how I play this turn. But instead of contesting this remote, I should have checked R&D and archives. And the reason I say that is I know the 2 cards in HQ basically guaranteed. Like the Hansei review on this tells me, okay, the 2 card for this to be a scoring threat of the oboe, which I guess I'll show here. I expose the oboe kata protocol on server 1. If I run R&D and then Giles bounces me, he actually has to bounce me into HQ because if we switch over to spectator view, there is an oboe kata in archives. So he bounces me to HQ. I then just jack out after this piece of ice. That gets me a turning wheel counter. I run R&D, hopefully trash the top card, and then run R&D, see a bunch of cards, or see 3 cards, and then run archives, because why wouldn't he bounce me into archives to take off a turning wheel counter? And that would be a path where I win the game actually a good chunk of the time, even if we ignore the fact that the win is locked in if I just run archives 3 times. One of the reasons I think I probably should have run archives is that 2 of these cards were dumped here. I think actually even more than 2 were dumped by Anoetic Void. So there was actual chances of there being stuff in here that was relevant. Instead, I take the line that just says, oh, I assume that there's no extra damage. It's just that I need to have 6 cards in hand, and I need to be able to run twice. But of course, a single Kakugo, which is in fact what's on this server, means I can't get in. And now I only have 1 click left, so AgInfusion is going to take the rest of the way, and so I have to concede. So I took Giles was threatening the win, but I had tools to not threaten the win. And this is like one of those games where like, oh, if I hadn't installed the Citadel Sanctuary way back on, like just going back several turns, there's a bunch of times where I would, instead of clicking for credits, I could have just played my run economy stuff. And so this is a game that sort of was stuck in my craw here a little bit for the whole game. And so it's like, yeah, oh, if I have 8 or if I have 9 credits here, I actually probably can dirty laundry R&D, and most of the time I'll be okay. I believe, yeah, this is actually the Anansi. And so dirty laundering R&D here at 9 credits is fine. But like just clicking for credits because I don't really have enough to break the Anansi, that actually can't be res, so maybe this is the wrong turn. But there was a couple of turns throughout the game where I like tunneled and hit the wrong thing. And so the biggest thing for me when I was talking with Ed about this is I just made several wrong assumptions about where the agendas were, where the ice suite was, or how the ice was, and then also how the ice was positioned. And so things I want to think about going in the future is being a little more careful. I felt like, oh, I checked HQ a bunch, but I actually hadn't checked HQ a bunch. I only end up running HQ for Actuses like 3 or 4 times this game. And then I ran R&D a good amount, but I didn't actually lock R&D. So there was like the thing that I want to start adding to my play is tracking like when I have a game like this, and this is part of it, is that I don't usually play criminal, so I don't get lots of singles for cheap. When you're in board states like this, track exactly how many cards in HQ you actually know, so that you can make the correct decisions about when and where to run. There were several opportunities in this game where I actually had a chance to win. There was one of the runs early on R&D. I would have actually stolen an oboe off the top of the deck if I had made it instead of clicking for a credit. So this replay, I think, shows a lot of my shortcomings as a runner, and partially helps explain to me why my runner win rate over the last 2 years is about 50%, because I can play fine decks that will do well, but they're just not going to be, it's not very, my play is not particularly precise, and so I'm prone to throwing away games that I was in a very strong position in. These replays, this is round 2 now, and this thing's already going quite long, so I'm going to just kind of try and fly through it. So this was a precision design list, and as you might have seen before I swapped the sides, as you might have seen, or actually as you will see, this is an unusual precision design list. The precision design matchup, I think, is close with good play. I think this opening hand I kept should not really be that close. Maryland campaign seemed odd to me, and it turns out to be one of several unusual deck choices. Maryland's usually not quite good in PD, it just doesn't do the things you want to do. I am a big fan, though, against PD of going for click 1 face checks, because a lot of the time there isn't that much punishing. Their ice is like hog, especially early in the game where they don't have a lot of good drafter targets. I'm getting some information. Border control looks more like a regular PD. I want to make them spend all their credits, and then get some value out of my value cards. I sort of assume that they're going to go and score on server 2. Daily Business Show is a very odd one to me, and that screams to me that my opponent's doing something a little bit unusual in PD. But usually something unusual in PD means that my matchup is even better. So that's a good thing. I trash the Tranquility because it often ends up being pretty important credit-wise. I don't know in retrospect that was the right thing to do. I think against a regular precision design list, that makes a lot of sense. Against this, the one that I'm seeing, maybe less so. One of the reasons to go for it is that I can land the diversion of funds at some point. And maybe that would have actually been a better use of this turn. Instead of inside jobbing server 2, just saying, oh, I can get a good swing. I've got 2 laundries in archive, so I can boomerang diversion and then just get back some laundries. But I also know with a Maryland on the board, there's not actually any real scoring threats here. Like, we just sort of click around a little bit here. Now, I hope yeah, okay. So, like, the corp's just sort of doing nothing. Just icing. And so it's just sort of like, okay, well, I need to find my breakers. I've got 1 down. Let's see. Exposing server 2. So I see an Ansel. I see a Gatekeeper. I don't know that paying 6 for a single access is... I actually think this is probably a mistake, even with Steve. Though spending the turning wheel counters makes it a little more reasonable. So seeing Biotic Labor is like a big, like, what? For me. It suggests that this deck is doing something really weird. You don't usually see Biotic Labor. Unprotected Rashida is also uncommon. So this is very clearly going to be something a little bit funky. And here they actually play the Biotic Labor to score a 4-2 off the table. So they paid a lot of credits to have a seamless launch. So now my plan is just, they just spent a bunch of credits. They didn't make that many back. I have all 3 diversions available, or no, I have 2 diversions available to me. Time to start using it. Because this is going to leverage me. This is like, they can't fast advance if they have no credits. And so as long as I'm getting back some decent targets with Steve, I will be a-okay. I generally have been doing a lot of maker runs with Deuces Wild. I think it works quite well with what the card is meant to do. If this is Chrysium Grid, I'm actually in a lot of trouble. It turns out to effectively be a Chrysium Grid, even though it's not actually a Chrysium Grid. So at this point, I'm like, okay, my goal is just to sort of lock out everything. They're on 8 credits. They can go for reses here. I spend all my clicks going through the Ansel, and so now I'm in a huge economic advantage. Oh, and I let the Ansel say I can't steal or trash because I had already spent a click doing something else, and that's the one I least care about. And I'm saying, okay, well, 8 credits. I need some way to probably handle that. But if they go down to basically 0, I think I'm okay with that. And that is what they do. And so now my goal is just, okay, I'm going to get back 2 diversions of funds. And then in a turn or 2, I will set up. I also just use the falsified for credits, which not really the best play. So like that run on HQ seems a little suspect to me. But at this point, I'm just trying to play some kind of control game. The 1 sandbox score is a little bit annoying. And then they wrote San City Grid here to dodge a diversion, which I'm fine with because I'll still be able to political operative it if they go for a score. I see another San. And now the rest of my game plan is just farming turning wheel counters. That's like all I have to do for the rest of the game. Keeping this remote honest for 2 credits is fine. And then trashing that server with bones. And then, yeah, it's just like, okay, time to farm turning wheel counters. It's worth spending 2 credits to take a credit away from them with Amina. And that's just like the rest of this game is doing a little bit of credit denial. And occasionally checking HQ. I build up to 12 turning wheel counters. The server slows down at 12 turning wheel counters, or 14 turning wheel counters, somewhere in there. I sweep the whole hand, assuming there's going to be some agendas in there, because I get a few, but not enough to win the game, which is a bummer. And then we just build up some turning wheel counters, and then go for a big run, and see 4 cards. There's not really a reason I should do it on this turn as opposed to a later turn. This was more, I think, I wanted to get stuff done in a reasonable amount of time. And counting on agendas, like, I should have reasonable chances to win, but probably the correct play is to wait another turn or 2, like just keep bouncing for a turn or 2. The one justification for going in on this turn would be that opponent is going to be recovering back 4 credits a turn, and I believe, yeah, I've used all 5 of my diversion of funds, so R&D will at some point become too expensive to run. And that was sort of that. And then I've got my game against the Sportsmetal game, and I'm really just going to blitz through this. Again, the question to me was just, does this Woo have a clot? And they just never left a clot threat on the table. So I just sort of played Sportsmetal. Put down 2 agendas behind a piece of ice. Score, get some credits. Score, get some credits. It always sucks to lose the luminal, but it happens sometimes. Opponent's just doing lots of building. I'm now trying to find agendas. I'm generally okay with them trashing the first spin doctor, especially when I have the other one on the table. So yeah, this is a turn where, like, if I know my opponent doesn't have CVS, I don't bother to put the clot on the table. But because I know they could have CVS, I do need to have, or they could have clot, I need to keep the CVS in hand. My opponent actually did some really nice stuff with equivocation here. It seemed like a fun tool on underprotected R&D for a while. But opponent ends up trashing it because they've basically got their value out of it to reinstall an SMC, get a cleaver, and that means I'm very open to just win the game as soon as I get a big enough agenda. So vanilla is really important in this list because it allows you to get Rashida's off on no credits. Though I'm also threatening Hagen, Gatekeeper, and Drafter here. And that's like the 1 to 4 credit ice suite for HB is really quite punishing to deal with. Yeah, my opponent uses an SMC in a way that suggests to me that they don't have clot in the list, and then it doesn't really matter anyway because I take them to 0 and we win the game. This is the second win on turn 8. So that was round 2. So now I'm at 3-1, and I get paired against Janktavist, someone in the testing group who I played a couple of games with. And he beats me very cleanly on precision design, and I sort of, I think, missed some pretty key plays, or some reasonable approaches I could have taken. So let's go to runner view. Do I keep this hand? I hope I do. Okay, yeah, it's a pretty reasonable hand. It's got some weird bits to it, but it seems pretty fine because I can go bop bop. Stealing a luminal turn 1 is pretty nice. Again, I'm a big fan of this bravado on 1. There's not a ton that they do to punish this sort of super early aggressive stuff, but now there's a Manic Arm. I now have to be a little more careful about how I check. I guess wrong, I think, on almost all of my falsifieds here, and just take the falsifieds for credits. I don't know if that's actually correct here. Like, I don't particularly mind hitting a lot of early ice because here Janktavist is on 5 credits. And so what I really should do is play the gamble and run server 1. I play the gamble and I just don't run server 1. I just do nothing for a turn. There's no realistic threats that really hurt here. A Gatekeeper, yeah, is annoying. A Drafter means I have to run on click 2 because they'll just reinstall the Manic Arm. But there's no reason for me not to run this server here. And this is just like ends up basically being my best and basically only window to really threaten the remote. Because now 9 credits, it's much, much harder for me to do anything. So diversion is nice there, I guess. And so now I could look at running server 1 again in the future. Right, this would be another good turn to go for it. And this time, at least I do. Turns out, like, yeah, Magnet would have come in, and that's fine. I think I've saved the gamble for a couple of reasons, but mostly so I can get the Anticam trigger next turn because I'm trying to maximize those. One thing that is bugging me, I have this Amina in hand. Why am I not, like, this turn I could install the Amina, Laundry R&D, and get some credit advantage going. All that's rezzed are code gates, and I have my code gate breaker. I am refusing to put it down. And I think some of this is me just not having played as much Criminal as I should have, where I'm very used to either using Amakua for everything, or whatever. And so now I'm like in a rough spot because the Manic Arm's going to get rezzed. and they've got no credit, so I'm just going to actually let the run end there on my diversion. Rashida fires, and it's quite bad for me here. Now, once again, though, only 4 credits. Probably should run the remote early in the turn. Because, yeah, 8 credits is a good amount, but it's not too bad. Whereas the bravado, like the reason the bravado is bad is because I don't have enough credits to handle any of the major threats. But like, I think basically I was a little bit too afraid of server 1, and then I didn't contest it until much too late in the game. And so like the game was basically over well before I could do anything. And there's no reason for me to install the Yamakua here. It is in fact worse than installing Paperclip. And just taking a credit, it's just worse than that. And so that's the game. And Janktavist played very nicely, and I did not. I think I applied some decent pressure on the first like 2-3 turns, but then let up the remote at the wrong time. Let's see. Next, we're on to the other match. Wow, this is already quite a long video. And this is another Sportsmetal game that just sort of flies through. It does its thing, and this is a big max list, which actually can have a surprisingly good matchup. But, you know, I get away with having Rashid on the board turn 1. Get 2 red levels. So my first turn, or my second turn, is get a Rashida fire and score Hyperloop and install a piece of ice on R&D. It's a pretty damn good start. Maw can be a problem for this list, for sure, because you can lose some really valuable stuff. But I can also use my ice as gear checks, and there's no paperclips down, so I'm fairly safe to go for aggressive agenda scoring plays. This double ice looks much scarier than it is in practice, and that's okay. Your opponent has to play around needing 2 breakers here, and they're just not going to have that most of the time. Now, and so we just get the luminal score, which is a huge deal. This installing against Maw, I'm liking less and less, and ends up costing me quite a bit. My opponent uses Botulos very nicely here. And I just decide to tell them nothing about this, because if I res the vanilla here, they get to use the overclock credits to install their paperclip. I'd rather they don't have those credits to do that. Trading Bass for 2 runs I'm generally fine with. I think I just fast advance out here. Oh wow, I don't. Oh no, I do. Okay, I just do it all, right? This is the fun thing about sports, is you kind of just get to do it all. And like, yeah, this is the reason where like, if you can avoid to res, it's great. And sort of why Sportsmetal is really good, unless your opponent is teched and gets a good draw. Though I am potentially very dead here, but them hitting the Sports Hopper just basically steals the game. It's very hard for me to lose from this board state, because they need to steal both the Vitruvius and the Mega Pre there. And I think arguably, when they steal here, what I should do is draw another time, so that because I only need 7 credits to win, and 9 credits doesn't help me at all. And they X with the Biotic Labor anyway, so I'm like, oh, did I have 2 though? No, I only had the 1. So like, there was actually a decent chance for me to lose there versus drawing, where I basically never lose. And just do my thing. So sports is going to sports. And this is the reason I basically took sports, is that even though it's much weaker without Vacheron, it is really good against, like, its matchup should be solid against the other corps. So up against James Marcus in round 4, I'm at what, going into round 4, I have 2 losses and 4 wins. And I see my opponent's Reina, and I am pretty happy because generally, if you're not max, you don't have the econ and speed to keep up. And that's basically exactly what happens. Just doing some drawing, getting Rashida's behind ice. They do get a very early turning wheel, which can be a major problem. As I was talking before the tournament, it's like, oh, basically I lose to turn 1 and 2 turning wheels because you can just single HQ or just run HQ jack out until you have 20 turning wheels, and my ice isn't good enough to stop you. And so then you just do it all in one dig and win the game. And that's actually the boring but correct line here for James. The issue is, if you're max, that game plan wins 100% of the time because your breakers naturally end up in the bin. Because you're Reina, that doesn't work because you have to find your actual breakers. And I can just like triple stack ice on R&D and make you need all of your breakers. One of the other reasons I like sports is like pad tap is bad. Turns out it's not that bad, and I think I never kill a pad tap on the day because it's just not that relevant. And here, yeah, we just see that like a lot of stuff is too slow. Like even a 0 Anarch with a turn 1 turning wheel is a little too slow. They go for some extra accesses, which is good for them. I do stuff in a weird order this turn because I always forget that Luminal gives you the 3 clicks. I don't know why. It's just like you can do better stuff. But yeah, so like, right, it's turn 8, or this is the end of turn 7, and I've got a very solid winning combo. Now, I do actually make a mistake here. Even though there's a Spin Doctor on the table, I should keep both of these in hand because both of them win the game. And then I can keep both of the Audacities in hand. And so like if some imp or something comes down, I've got lots of outs to actually win the game. As it is, if they snipe this one of Mega Pre, I actually maybe don't win next turn. And that's, you know, the way to lose the game is to not win the game when you can. And so that's that game. The next game, this is still round 4. Let's see. I am up against jamesmarcus's Jemison, and I sort of assume that this is Narrow Spike Jemison because it's the good Jemison deck to me. I know there actually was some other Jemison decks that did okay on the day, but I sort of read this pretty early. I sort of assumed this was, and I think I ended up getting confirmation on it pretty quickly. And so for me, the thing I thought about going in is I want to hold back a class act in hand. Just even though the draw is not as good as a whole, Jemison, which just isn't quite as solid as other IDs. So I can be a little bit slower overall as long as I find my tools in time. And this was a great opening hand. It's got lots of econ trip, you know, everything you could ask for. I see an Oberth, which is always in there. There's an early standoff, and I'm like, I'll trash a pad tap. We can trade. Like, basically, they traded their turn for a pad tap. I'm okay with that. Losing the Rozeki stinks, for sure. But fortunately, it's not too nasty there. I'm not respecting like an HHN Jemison, which arguably I should be, or like an Econ Warfare HHN Jemison. But when you're playing stuff like Tithonium, I'm like tend to respect those sorts of plans less. And now I do have actually a pretty decent way to start pressuring Econ, which is always nice to do. But the biggest thing I'm actually doing is trying to draw breakers. because breakers are going to be actually how I win the game. Let's see, what's this? Oh yeah, this is an archer. I forgot about that. And at this moment, I was like, oh, I'm actually just going to lose because they get a 2 counter archer, and that's like almost always a loss. And then I top deck the class act, and I'm like, oh, okay, I'm gold here. And then also I have the paperclip, so I can start doing diversions, which will narrow out the econ lead. Opponent goes install Daddy. And this is exactly why you hold the class act. I can go bravado, see a card in HQ. I see a neurospike, so now I have total confirmation. And again, like, I think a lot of people use Uses Wild for 2 cards and 3 credits, but generally it's better to make a run if you can afford to. And like here we get to see that payoff. So now if I can get into server 3, I win the game, and I actually have this tool. I just need some way to break Afshar. And now also I can't die the Jemison, or I can't die the Neurospike because I have 8 cards in hand. And so I have exactly what I need here. So I get to go. Yeah, I like could have installed the Amina. I think I was like super paranoid there's some tricks, but there literally is no trick that can happen here. And so I win the game pretty handily. And basically this game came down to me drawing the class act exactly when I needed to, drawing all my breakers in the top half. And so that sort of play allowed me to beat this Jemison Neurospike list. There's definitely a lot of scenarios where I could have gotten really roughed up by this list, but I had the good reg draw and got away with it. So another option would have been Citadel Sanctuary, would have also let me go and get server 3 pretty easily. So this is one of those things where like I wonder if those 2 Atlas counters were best spent on doing exactly the play that James went for, or if they should have been used for something else. But hard to tell. Okay, so that was round 4. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I get paired against Pinsel, round 5. So the end of round 4, I am... I'm, 6-2? And so is Pinsel. And so I draw into Pinsel. And... NWE's Gagarin deck is really good. I had not watched it the day before, and so I just sort of faceplant into a terrible, like I just play this matchup I think pretty badly. I had actually a very good draw. Citadel, Class Act, Bones, and 2 gambles, like that shouldn't be a losing hand, but I played it like one for sure. I was very, very worried about Econ Warfare, hard-hitting news, but like this is the turn where I could slam Bones, like Bravado with Central, and then like clear out servers 3 and 4. Instead of drawing here, I think would have been the right call, because I've got lots of tools to help deal with stuff, and instead I just sort of sit around doing nothing. And so I'm like, you know what, maybe I shouldn't run until you make me run, and then I decide, no, that's not what I want to do. Like, there's no actual compelling reason for me to play this Bravado here, compared to installing the Bones and taking a credit. Like, there's just lots of things like that, where, like, hitting this Veritas just ends up, like, I'm just behind for the rest of the game here. And then... Pinsel like pays into traces a bunch because he's done math exactly right. He's got this sort of information, and so I'm in a very hard spot. I have to zoom out a little bit. Let's see. And now I'm down to 3 credits, so I'm quite dead. Yeah, so like I just played this badly. There's like part of this is me not knowing the ice suite. I sort of assume there's nothing too bad here, but Veritas is like a huge blowout. It's a credit even swing that gives me a tag, which is a huge problem. And so then I just sort of kill myself for no reason. Also, I felt like I was an idiot for not actually... oh, yeah, so my thing was like, oh, I could have, instead of doing nothing, I could have trashed... where am I? Yeah, I could have gone and trashed both Bankers and Wall-to-Wall, and then Pinsel wouldn't have enough credits to play Boom, but he had HBT in hand. I just had no way of knowing. But that would have at least been my out to survive another turn. And so this is, I think, like, there's like a couple clicks that I do well. Pinsel's draw was pretty solid. And I think it's hard for me to know the mistakes because I literally have only played against that deck once. And that's sort of the advantage of coming in with a custom brew. And then we have the other matchup of Sportsmetal versus Hivemind Max. And part of the reason I went to Sportsmetal was I knew it had a rough Hivemind Max matchup, but I figured there's no way I get paired against anyone on day one who's playing Hivemind Max or day 1B. And of course, I would land against Pinsel, probably one of the top 3 players of Hivemind Max in the world, probably top 2. And I say, well, I have to rush because Hivemind Max's late game and Conduit game plan is just so freaking good against me. CVS early is pretty nice, but I need to actually find stuff. And like this play of install a vanilla, install an agenda is usually like a win-win for me. But Pinsel happens to have Imp in his opening hand, and so my whole game plan just goes away. A lot of my game plans are about using tempo, and I just can't tempo anymore. With Botulus down, or with Botulus available, it's very hard for me to tempo out behind agendas. With Imp down, I can't put agendas naked on the board. And so, like, I don't think I actually play this game too badly. Like, I get decent stuff happening. I think, arguably, instead of protecting R&D here, I should install the Rashida and then install another ice on server 2. That feels like potentially a better line for me here, rather than putting the Rashida behind one piece of ice. If it's behind 2 pieces of ice, it's much harder for Pinsel to challenge it. So that is, I think, an actual mistake I could fix. Even though it's double barrier, you wouldn't know that on the first encounter. So losing the Rashida stinks. Getting the GFI in hand is unfortunate. I believe Pinsel is on the no Amakua 1 DJ list, which is a real bummer for me. And then, you know, he gets to start imping away my key combo pieces. He gets to imp away agendas. I actually don't love that. Did he just play the chisel? Yeah, okay, he did just play the chisel. So, like, it's not my favorite play, but it's not a bad one by any means. It just means he gets free HQ access. And then I'm like, okay, you know what? My one play is I can install 2 agendas, and he can't imp them both. And that's sort of what I'm left to. Because there's now 2 points in archives, but more importantly, this Mega Pre, like, the first Mega Pre I score is going to be a single point. But yeah, basically Imp takes apart my entire board. I have to just go for risky plays where I like dump more agendas and archives. My out here is not having both audacities in hand when I play the first one. Because I'm actually on 5 agenda points. If I could somehow score this Vitruvius, I'm in a great spot. So honestly, what I probably should have done is just shuffle 2 audacities there instead of, and then just said, you're going to get points off of me. You're going to get the 2 points rather than shuffling, or you're going to get 3 points and then just lived with that. Pinsel also 1 and 4s the Vitruvius, which is really bad because that's my only way out. And then he's on 5 agenda points. He knows there's 2 face up, and so just is able to take him a very nice clean win. So this felt like there was definitely some, I think potentially doing the 2 ice server on server 2 to get 1 more Rashida Fire maybe wins me the game, but a turn 1 imp is always going to be a pretty brutal matchup for sports, and I had sort of chosen the deck under the assumption that I wouldn't see a lot of hive mind, and I felt like I had good odds against the rest of the field. And I happened to get, I'm not going to say, I will say unlucky in the pairings, and then also in the draw that I was up against. So now I'm at 6 and 4, and so I can no longer afford to lose any more games if I'm going to make day 2. And so I 2 for 1. And my 2 for 1 in round 6 is Shiiuga. And it's Sportsmetal against Edward Kim. Edward Kim could, in theory, be a problem. But usually there's so many different fast advanced tools I can have, and Edward Kim's going to be a little slow, that I wasn't too worried about it. My voice is starting to go, so I'm going to start wrapping, these last 2 games. There's not that much to say. I was very happy to get this matchup. I forget what Shiiuga's. Oh yeah, Shiiuga's corp deck was Polana, and I hadn't played that matchup a ton. We ended up playing Polana versus Steve. We both played very loose, so I'm not gonna go through that replay. But I ended up winning that one as well. So I at least won the. I did actually end up winning both 2 for 1s, but I'm a big advocate of taking 2 for 1s. I arguably could have taken them earlier, but ended up not really needing them. So. This is just, as you can see, my favorite play. And opponent once again gets a turn 1 imp, and I go, geez, what are the freaking odds? But so I actually probably normally wouldn't res the G's there, but I basically say, oh, getting an install on R&D is probably worth it here. I basically only ever use the planograms to draw. Actually, no, that's not strictly true, but. What was this ice here? Gatekeeper? Maybe I should have rezzed, honestly. I guess my thinking was I wanted to... Yeah, okay, so I wanted to keep my centrals a bit safer, which was the idea. Is this the CVS? No, it's the Hyperloop, right. Okay, I can't read my own hand. But like this game, like Ed definitely throws a couple of wrenches in the plan, but getting like a Drafter Fire is a big deal. Because it gets me a Rashida back. I get all sorts of stuff. I think I end up having a weird scoring pattern in this game. But 3 Spin Doctors plus Audacity is a really nice combo. And just advances stuff off the board. It's worth at some point just making the owner actually install their breakers so that they don't get to run for free. I wonder if I should have fast advanced the Vitruvius here. I think my idea was Gatekeeper Vanilla is expensive for them to get through. But I'm actually at a pretty substantial risk of getting the Vitruvius stolen, which lowers my odds of winning by a decent percentage here. But basically, I just don't have to care that much about pad taps, because I will eventually just get enough pieces to score out. Like, the only way I lose on this hand is if Ed finds the Mega Pre, and I can just draw 2 off of that. And it's very hard for him to get to... He didn't have enough clicks to get to enough points without a mad dash, and no real tools for it. And so I score out, winning the 2 for 1, giving me a record of 8 and 4. And so I'm into my last game up against Sanjay. At the time, or immediately after this game against Sanjay, I was quite annoyed because I felt like he got incredibly lucky. After watching back this replay, he both got lucky, and I made a bunch of really quite silly mistakes. So Sanjay is playing what was effectively the Big Max Aeneas Informant list, which I knew to be about a 50-50 matchup, because it turns out if they just get the Maw down, you can usually win. If they get the Maw and the Turning Wheel down, or the Maw and the Stargate down, you're in a lot of trouble. But this hand looked really solid. I think, though, like I sprint here, probably turn 1 should just be installed 2 Hyperloops. It's very hard to go wrong by installing 2 Hyperloops. But, you know, it's fine. It's not really the end of the world here. If I drew an agenda this turn also, I would be very happy, but I didn't. Icing server 3, this is like me trying to actually do a mind game here of, oh, this is a Rashida, and so you need to invest resources on it. And, you know, Sanjay's drawing a lot. He doesn't have Paperclip in the heap, so, like, if that was a Rashida, it would be sick. And here I go for a big play. Scoring the Luminal, taking 2. And here I make my big mistake of the game, which is that I ice R&D. I don't know why, in retrospect, I iced R&D. There's really no... I think I was worried about Stargate, but HQ is always the relevant server. HQ is where I keep valuable cards, and is where I keep my tools, and Anarch has lots of ways to disrupt that. Single accessing off of R&D is not a problem. I've seen 1 Stargate in the bin. There's probably not more than 1 other in the list. And so it's like I'm playing around in 1 in 47 versus playing around a server that always has value for the runner to run, or almost always. And this ends up costing me just enormously in this game. So, you know, so it goes. Hyperloop just as a mini Rashida is pretty nice. Here, this is like the first time where I'm like, Sanjay's luck is freaking amazing. There's literally every other card he accesses doesn't matter. The Spin Doctor access does matter. But again, if I have this Gatekeeper here, he instead goes for the single on R&D, and I'm much, much happier with that. Like, even if this ends up being an agenda, like, oh, it would have been the other Spin Doctor, but that's okay, because that Spin Doctor would be trashed off the top of R&D rather than out of my hand. And I would instead have drawn a Vitruvius, which would be amazing here. So it's just like those sorts of things where it's like, oh, okay, and not trying to be like too like retrospective on like what works and what didn't work, but like this is why you want to ice HQ, because instead of being results based, it's just the valuable place for the runner to go. They get to take tools out of your hand, and with Maw, I know that there's a lot of threat on my hand, and so I do eventually ice it up, but I'm already kind of too late. I've lost the Spin Doctor already. This Botulus basically has made this vanilla blank, and that's okay. This is a game where I get 2 Audacities in HQ, which is not ideal, but I'm very close to winning here. I actually have everything I need to win the game. And Sanjay gets the Maw, Stargate down. Trashes Project Vitruvius. And then there's only 1 card that hurts me in HQ. Oh, no, I don't win because there's no Mega Pre scored. Right. I think, though, I should just score the Mega Pre here in retrospect, because having no cards in my hand is okay. It sort of soft turns off the Maw, and it means when I get my last Spin Doctor, I get to shuffle again, or I just need to draw a Biotic and any other agenda in my list, basically, and I'll be okay. So I sort of go for this weird, risky play, and it just doesn't actually make any sense. Like, I just don't play this match very well. Like, I could... So the reason I think I don't res there initially is because I want to not go broke. But now I decide, oh, one click later, it's okay to go broke. So, like, yeah, this match is sort of lost on me choosing to res at weird times, putting my ice in the wrong places, and then not being aggressive enough with my scores. If I instead of trying to score out in 4, I should have tried to just score out in 5, because it also takes away points from Sanjay, and I'm not going to get value out of the cards in my hand anyway. And so I need to turn off the Stargate and do all that stuff. And then and then here Sanjay does get another, I think, pretty solid hit, which is he 1 in 7s the so like he has a 2 in 7 to get, well, he has basically a 1 in 7 twice to get the Spin Doctor. And he gets it, and so I'm in a really rough spot now. But I only need 1 credit here. And then he goes for a very nice Wanton. I don't know he has Wanton. It's a little bit of an unusual include in the list. But this is again where, like, oh, I've overvalued the cards in my hand a little bit when I could have done Audacities earlier. This Rashida Fire is close-ish to winning the game. But again, if I had scored earlier, maybe there's a way I can find ways to score out here. The thing I don't like also about these 2 installs is it means that he gets to get a mod trigger without paying any credits, which ends up really hurting here. He gets 1 agenda that way, and then my agenda density HQ is enormous. Losing the Vitruvius means I've only won 3-2 in the deck that I can win out on. Oh no, I've got a couple now, though I actually know that I have the other 2 Mega Pre's, I think. Just the 1 in Archives. Yeah. So I don't know. This is like I made a bunch of mistakes in this game. I'm now actually able to win next turn, except that I have this Jeeves down, which is now going to maw away the GFI, which costs me the game. If I don't have this Jeeves, he has to pay credits to go and access Centrals, and he doesn't really have enough to do everything here. Like, he would have enough to get a single access, but like, it's much less likely he wins the game off of that. And so, you know, this is a matchup I knew was close, and then I think I played it quite poorly, and some of that is probably due to me being at the end of the day. And then also Sanjay applied pressures in exactly the right ways, and the Wanton Destruction was a really nice card for this matchup. So Sanjay played very well. I played pretty poorly, and so I end the day. My official final record is 8-6, of which I technically, what did I actually end up? My like played games record is 7-4, which, you know, I think it is much better than I was expecting to do on the day. I was expecting Steve to do better than it did, but I think it's tough because I didn't think I was going to do well on the day, and then got my hopes up because I was, you know, 1 game of making it into day 2. Like, this 2 for my strength of schedule was good enough that I would have made the tiebreaker rounds on day 2, and that would have been, I feel like, a really big accomplishment. And instead, I'm kind of this Worlds I'm just going to kind of slip under as an okay finisher. It's actually one of the reasons. This is like subtly one of the reasons I want to move over to single-sided Swiss, because 2-for-1s really distort how close people are to making the cut, because the people that can't make the cut actually can get a game ahead of me and stuff like that. But that's like a little bit selfish. I think the reality of my Worlds performance, I think the Sportsmetal deck was a pretty solid meta call, for the day I was on. I think on day 1A, where there would be more Hive Mind Max, it would be a pretty bad call. I actually don't think its Adam matchup is that bad, though I haven't played against the NWE Adam. I have played against Ed on stream, who was playing Adam, and it was not like the HQ pressure, while being bad, and the Find the Truth pressure, which in theory should be bad, just never quite work because you have enough ice that you're just going to blitz past the Adam before it really gets anything done. So I think Sports was a good meta call. I think in retrospect, I should have played a Big Max. I just literally never picked up the list. It seems much more my style of runner than Steve does. And it ended up being really, really solid and robust on the day. So that sort of is going to be the wrap up of my Worlds coverage, or of my personal Worlds reviews. I think my taking 4 losses on the day, my ones against Pinsel, I'm not too miffed about. I think I probably didn't need to lose my runner game against Pinsel as badly as I did, especially given the draw I had. But I think that's also one of those ones where, like, it's a very odd matchup, and I had seen literally no games of it, and he had definitely played against Steve before, so it was going to be a tricky one for me. And the Hive Mind matchup, I think in retrospect, I had a window there, but it was a pretty narrow one with the draw he had. I think if he draws the imp on turn 3 rather than turn 1, it's a very different game. And then against Sanjay, I think I actually made some initially, like, yeah, Sanjay got some really good hits with Ma. He got some really good accesses on HQ, but I actually don't think I played particularly well with this Sportsmetal against Sanjay. I sort of broke a bunch of rules that I don't usually break and got really punished for them. My game against Giles, where he beat me on AgInfusion, I think is one of those games I'm going to beat myself up a little bit for, because not only did I have a guaranteed win, I also had probable wins with the information I had. And then those are all 4 of my losses. So I think that's probably going to be it for, like, my own coverage of my own Worlds. But if people do have replays they want to send along, I'd love to do some analysis of World replays. I think this meta ended up being very different and interesting than I expected. I'm looking forward to going through some of the stuff. And not exactly sure what my next set of content is going to be, but I hope y'all enjoy this fairly long run through of my Worlds. So.